Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about the Kids Online Safety Act, which is a legislative bill that has been being debated for years at this point. To a lot of you probably haven't heard about it before. This might be your first time hearing about it, but it is a piece of legislation and realistically a concept, I guess, that has been an argument for society for years, right? Now, obviously, over the last 20 or so years, as the internet has basically grown in every aspect of our lives, social media and things like that have popped up, and it has transformed the way that people socialize. It's transformed the way that people interact with one another. It's basically reshaped the entire internet as it stood anyway. And there's a lot of pros and cons to this, right? There's a lot of good things that happen from this increased online interconnectivity, and there's also a lot of bad things. Now, some of these bad things include some social negatives. People seem to be more depressed. Mental illness seems to be more common today. A lot of people are spending way too much time online. They're taking things online way too seriously. They're kind of, disinterested in their normal lives. It's a pretty big swing for people to go through in what is basically their lifetime. I mean, you got to think there are people alive that weren't around for even really the beginning of personal computers, okay? And in their lifetime, they have seen computers go from things that are the size of a room down to basically microscopic. They've seen the internet come along, they've seen social media, all this shit, right? So it's been a pretty quick transition for humanity to have to go through, but with these negatives, there is always the worry, I guess, that they will harm society. More specific to this video, I guess, those involving the harms and the risks for children online. Now, before we even get any further in the video, I'm gonna go ahead and say, I can't stress this enough. I think everybody understands that there are dangers for children online. Most children shouldn't really be on social media and shit like that. It's not good for them. It's not really great for their development. It causes a lot of problems. It puts them at risk for people like child predators and whatnot. I mean, there's a ton of different inherent risks, but I think most of us can agree that the answer to this is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, okay? So this Kids Online Safety Act has been pushed pretty heavily, especially in the last few days, because like I said, this has been something that's been getting debated for a while. This piece of legislation has existed for a while, but it's basically sat there dormant, and it's in its last few days of viability before, basically it won't pass, and they're trying to push it through now. They're trying to get this thing sent through probably before Trump becomes president, and they're basically painting it like, if this isn't passed, this is the end of child safety online, right? This is the law that's gonna save and protect our kids. Now, also, before we go further in this video, I want to go ahead and present one simple thing here, okay? Anytime you hear the government come along and say, hey, we want to make this massive sweeping change to things, we want to pass this legislation, we want to enter in all these new regulations on things, we must protect the kids. This is all about the children. You should almost inherently distrust them simply for saying that. Now, I know what some of you are already going to say, because it's the same tired argument that you hear from these people all the time, because like I said on Twitter, whenever this is presented as the reasoning, we must save our kids. Whenever this is presented as the reasoning, you can't oppose it vocally. You can't say, no, this won't protect kids, or you're lying, or whatever, right? Because the automatic comeback is, oh, so what? You don't want to protect kids? What's wrong with you? You don't care about children's safety? You don't think kids should be protected online? And obviously it's so dishonest, because nobody is saying that, nobody thinks that. The concern is with the legislation itself, which I can't believe that Americans haven't realized this yet, but very frequently, the government names bills that they are introducing very dishonestly to literally basically misguide people on what the legislation is actually passing. For instance, they'll have a law come along that's called the Save America and Protect Everyone Act, right? And it's oh, that sounds great, but then you look inside of it and they're actually putting $700 million towards trying to pop popcorn in space. And it's well, wait, that's not protecting Americans and saving the country. What is this? And that's basically what this is. Now, over the last couple of decades, the government has repeatedly to try passing laws, basically, that will, over time, basically erode people's free speech, erode people's constitutional rights, invade their privacy more and more, make things way more restrictive under the guise of making them safe. Especially since 9/11, this has been the case. And it turns out that none of this legislation ever seems to really do much of anything to make anyone safer. So you see this whole Kids Online Safety Act, and the big problem with it is that it's very vague in the wording. Like, you know, for what issues it's tackling, it's basically saying things like, we're going to mandate that websites have parental features to, like, you know, stop their children from seeing certain things or interacting with certain features. We're going to introduce universal child safety monitoring on these websites. But the problem with that is basically all of the social media that they claim are problems, you know, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, all of these, right? They already have these features in place. In fact, all of the answers to a lot of these problems regarding children's safety actually starts in the home. It has nothing to do with needing more government regulation. It has nothing to do with the federal government needing to quote unquote protect you. It's about people being good parents. It's about people having boundaries with their children. It's about people saying no to their children. And it's about reforming the way that the youth in our country think in the first place. So example number one, the Patriot Act, okay? Now this was back in the 2000s. This was passed basically giving the government way more oversight and overreach into the privacy of Americans. That way they could investigate potential terrorists because, you know, we had to protect Americans. We had to save the children. We can't have another 9/11 happen, folks. And so they passed this bill. They made all these changes. And now we live in basically a fucking surveillance state where the NSA and the federal government have tapped your phones. They're reading your emails. They have keyloggers on your fucking devices. They're listening in on every fucking, you know, Discord or phone call, anything that you make. The smart mics in all of your Wi-Fi products in your house, like your Google Homes and shit like that or whatever, they're recording you. They're monitoring what you're saying. And this isn't even conspiracies. This is just objective fact at this point, right? And even though the government acted to make everybody so safe and they made all these changes and they're way more restrictive and they have their eye on everybody, notice how terrorism is suddenly not gone. Notice how Americans still aren't safe. I mean, there's fucking drones flying all over the country right now that nobody seems to know who they belong to. No one has any answers on. How safe do you feel with that going on? How safe do you feel going into Walmart or a school or anything and being shot and killed in a mass shooting, right? So nobody is actually safer when the government passes these regulations and these laws. And even with all the online legislation that they've tried doing, you know, the KOSA, like that was a big deal here on YouTube, where you have to mark your video safe for kids and shit like that. What exactly has that done to make kids safer online? What has any of this legislation that's been passed for decades now done to make the internet safer for children and make it to where, you know, they're not facing the effects of like TikTok brain rot and, you know, social pressures and shit at school? What has anything done here that the government's done? So they've done nothing effective. They've done nothing to curtail the problem for decades, and they've used this constantly and this like guise of making people safer constantly as an excuse to erode your rights and take your freedoms away, make the internet worse. And what has come from it? Absolutely nothing. And that's what's going to come from this. I mean, when you look at KOSA, right, a lot of the coverage is like, oh, but there's a lot of bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans both voted for it, right? It's going to be a great thing. The only reason that this is even being said is because they want to like hyper focus on that bipartisan part, because that makes it sound to people like this is something, it's common sense, you know, everybody's in on this one. But the sad reality is both Democrats and Republicans voted for the Patriot Act. They vote for all of the wars that happen. They vote for all of the, you know, restrictive agencies. They vote for all of the military action. They both vote for everything that erodes people's freedoms and ruins your quality of life. They allow these companies to run fucking unchecked across all these industries just because they're buddies with the CEOs and their lobbyists are paying them money, right? But all of a sudden now they have a real interest in protecting you. But somehow people aren't putting two and two together that, wow, maybe that's a little suspicious, right? Why is it now suddenly that the government wants to protect me when they don't give a fuck any other time? It's almost like there's an ulterior motive behind doing something like this. Now, the reason why laws like this continue to be introduced, where they want to make it to where, you know, we're protecting the kids, they want to put more restrictions on social media and shit like that, is because the government realizes what social media and the internet allows, okay? Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of social media is just brain-rotted, stupid arguments and shit, but people use these places as outlets, and they use these places to talk about things that are going on in reality. A lot of people call them digital town squares and shit. Now, obviously, they're ran by private companies, so you're at basically the discretion of those companies when you use them, but you're not at the discretion, for instance, of the federal government to like go on Twitter and say, President Biden is a dum-dum, right? Or I hate Trump. You're not really at the government's discretion for that point, right? Because it's your First Amendment right to just be like, yeah, fuck them guys, fuck the government, you know? Now, private companies, like I said, they're not bound by the First Amendment. They can ban you. But the thing is a lot of this shit that they're trying to push has just already been normal, right? Like there's already parental controls on everything. And ultimately, like as a parent, if you don't want your kids seeing bad shit online, then don't let them use the websites. I mean, people act as if like, well, I can't control what my child does. You can take their phone, you can shut off their cell service on their phone, you can confiscate the computer, you can put on the safe search, you can put on the parental locks, you can force them to use kids-only accounts. Your child does not have to have TikTok or Snapchat or Facebook to live a life. I mean, me, for instance, I didn't have a smartphone until I was in fucking high school. Why did I not have a smartphone until I was in high school? Because there was no need for an 11-year-old child to have a smartphone. There was just no need for it. And in my opinion, I don't think most smartphone using children today should have them either. Why don't kids, if they need a phone or whatever, have flip phones and shit like that, where they don't sit there and mindlessly doom scroll social media all day? It's because parents give in to their children. And, oh, but all my friends have the iPhone. Why can't I have one, mom? It's societal shit. It's consumerism and all this other shit where everyone has to keep up with the Joneses. Oh, well, the Joneses let their kids use TikTok. We'll be the weird parents if we don't let our kids use TikTok. Who gives a shit about being the weird parents if it means that your child isn't on there wanting to kill themselves because of the comments or developing eating disorders because they're looking at models and shit on Instagram all day? Which one do you think as a parent sounds worse? And well, apparently most parents seem to think, well, they don't give a shit. But apparently the answer to that is not making parents better and making society better. It's giving the government the keys to the castle and just letting them decide what happens when they are historically just as ineffective, if not even less effective than the other alternative, right? So now we're sitting here where people are just like constantly wondering like, well, are we going to make our kids safer with this law, or is this another bullshit law they're passing that does basically nothing to protect me or my kids? And the funniest part is while they're like, oh, this KOSA bill, it's bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats like it, they don't seem to point out very frequently that they completely disagree on what exactly this is supposed to be targeting. While Democrats are like, oh, well, we got to prevent our children from seeing extremist content and shit that can cause mental disorder and stuff like that, you have Republicans who are saying, we need to stop the woke trans LGBTQ ideology. We need to stop all of this woke leftist mob shit. So while it's quote unquote bipartisan, they both see the reasons that this needs to pass completely differently. And they have completely different worldviews on why this would be enforced. Suddenly, though, that part isn't what's making the headlines. That part's not the part that's getting pushed to the average American. But the similarities in why they both want it is because they as the government can use it as basically a stepping stone. And I hate using this argument, but this is the reality of government. And this is exactly what laws like this KOSA stand to really do. So what they do is they notice a societal problem. Oh, kids are being harmed by social media. They're being harmed by the internet. Step one is to pass quote unquote common sense bipartisan legislation to tackle the issue, where they name it something like this, you know, Kids Online Safety Act, to make it seem like it's real legit, real good, gonna work. Then a couple years later, when of course that law did nothing to actually solve any problems, they come back and they say, well, we need more restriction, actually. We need more legislation. Last time we didn't take it far enough. We actually need to push it even further. We need to restrict more. And so then another law is going to come up down the line where they got to push the goal line just a little bit closer, right? Just a teeny bit further. And they constantly will do this over the next few years, maybe next few decades, until they get to a point where they've created an overarching system of restriction, regulation, guidelines that gives them an overarching power to do basically what they want. And then it gets to a point where down the line, they start floating the idea of digital ID and stuff like that. So basically to sign into social media or voice your opinion on forums or use most websites, you have to provide, you know, your ID, your name, maybe where you live, maybe your social security number, some information, right? That way, we at least know who you are, because, I mean, what if you were to say something extremist online? We would need to know who you are. That way the government could show up at your door and fuck with you about saying it. And if you've read any sort of history book, you'll realize that once the government starts getting the power, you know, to basically criminalize in their own way dissenting opinions about them or alternative opinions that maybe stand against the narrative that the state is providing, then they use that power to inflict tremendous pain and suffering back on the people that they overrule. And it's already happened in America. I mean, we're already at a point, like I said, we're in a surveillance state where me recording this audio right now and putting it out on the internet, there is some sort of NSA loop there that's fucking scanning through everything, that's catching this audio, detecting if anything crazy is going on. Whenever you comment something online, there's going to be a record of that kept so that if the NSA ever needed to read it, they're going to be able to see it. You make a phone call to mom later and she tells you she baked cookies, there's going to be some NSA fucking roll of tape there that has that caught. Any email you send, they've got a copy of that somewhere. But remember, they're doing it all to make you safer. And that's why you're so safe now. Like I said, that's why there's drones flying over your house. You have no idea who they are. You wonder if it's the Chinese or if they're looking for a nuclear bomb or if it's aliens or if it's just your neighbor flying his drone. You'll never know. But hey, at least you're safe, right? And that's why we need more. We need more regulation. We need more government oversight. We need their nose deeper up our asshole. That way they can sniff the turd before it even comes. Because God forbid if they didn't catch the terrorists before it happened, or they didn't stop children from being, you know, exposed to ideologies they don't agree with, or maybe see something that they don't like, or people that post opinions they don't like, that'd be a problem. I mean, just to wrap this video up, back when Elon Musk bought Twitter, he ended up dropping these things called the Twitter files. He basically sent all of this exposed information out through journalists to the public that showed Twitter, before Elon Musk purchased the company, was essentially contacted repeatedly by the US federal government. They were told to censor certain topics. They were told to bury certain plot lines. For instance, when the Hunter Biden laptop story was a big fucking deal, Twitter silenced that because it was so close to the 2020 election. They were worried that it might influence the election if people knew that Hunter Biden did all the bad shit that he was doing. And so they admitted, they cowered, they capitulated, and they censored that information. And both the Democrats and the Republicans contacted Twitter asking them to take down content on the platform and to restrict what people were saying on the platform. Because of course they have to protect people. But keep in mind, even though all of this happened, how much safer are you that Twitter and other private social media companies were essentially contacted by the government Gestapo and told what to say and do and allow on their platforms? How much safer are you after they did that in secret behind your back? How much safer are you after all the legislation that's passed before? How much safer are you, really? How much safer are your children? And if everyone's worried about child safety, why is nobody taking their social media? Why is nobody limiting their electronic usage? Why is nobody actually fucking parenting their children? We as a country have to stop this whole idea that everything that revolves around your family and your children, and realistically things that you could solve in your own household, we have to stop anticipating that the government has to solve it all for you. They are not working in your best interest. They are not passing this legislation to try and make your life better. They're doing it so they have more control over you. They're doing it so there's more legal precedent to step further into your constitutional rights. The only thing is they're using catchy, quirky names and they're cherry-picking information to make you believe that this is what's going on. But if we as Americans continue to allow this, we continue to allow elected officials to constantly push through legislation that step by step is marching us further down the line towards constitutional rights being eroded, we are going to see the results and the ramifications of that a lot fucking sooner than people really want to realize or expect. And it's not going to be something that people like. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not going to be something you like. Because while you think that they may be targeting quote unquote the other side and they're taking out their ideology, this is always how it starts. Then tomorrow, what you think becomes the wrong think of the government. What you think is now against what the narrative is. And then suddenly you're the target of all of this shit. But remember, it's all about saving the kids. Anyway, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel. Follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at SubTheOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. Thank you to my Watch Optimus subscribers. Your support helps the channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, talking about the Kids Online Safety Act and signing out.